Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I decided to do a video just about the overall application process timeline for applying to medical school. Back when I first was thinking about starting the process, it was so confusing and the timeline was so unclear to me. I felt like there was not one place where I could look to just find what I had to do at what point in time. So I kind of pieced it together along the way from different resources I could find, but I was thinking it would be probably helpful to just put it all together into one video so that people can just get an overview of what the timeline looks like, because it's definitely a long haul getting it all done. And also just a note, the timeline can differ depending on how early you want to start things, or just how early you get things in, and then the process can continue. So mine, I started way on the earlier side, and if you can do that, I would definitely recommend it because it just gets it out of the way and you'll be done kind of before the majority of people, and that will just limit your stress levels by a lot, I found. So that is something I would definitely say is helpful, to do things on the earlier side. But with that, I think I'll get started. I have a timeline that I made for showing you as I talk about it, so I'll just switch to that and we'll begin. So I wanted to start by just going over what I did in my undergrad years. I think that's probably when you even start technically start the process of moving towards med school, because there's prerequisites that you have to take, different requirements that you can fill in different ways for certain schools. So I don't have the requirements for each school specifically because I know they differ a little bit, but generally the science courses are all similar that you need to take, like the basics, biology, chemistry, things like that. And then there's other requirements like maybe English, composition, some may require biostats or like a foreign language or psychology. So you definitely have to check specifically with the schools that you are going to apply to and see what's required for those schools. I'll also mention I went to a liberal arts college and they required their own set of non-science courses that I took. So I'm not going to include all the courses I took every year because some of them just are irrelevant to most people. So I'll just mention the big courses that were the science prerequisites and when I took those. And then I'll also just mention, I think there might be some other side ones I just want to mention that were helpful to take. All right, so freshman year, I started by taking general biology 1 the first semester, and then I took general biology 2 the second semester. Both I took with the lab course. I did the same with chemistry, did chemistry 1 and 2 with lab over the 2 semesters. I took calculus 1 and 2 over the 2 semesters. This one, if you took AP calculus in high school and if you scored well enough on the exam and you got credit, I believe there were people who could have skipped this requirement. But that's something you definitely have to check with the specific schools that you apply to and what they require as far as credits. I don't think there's much else freshman year. It's pretty straightforward. Sophomore year, I took organic chemistry, which was a treat. I took 1 and 2, both with lab, and I was very glad once those were over. I started taking research for credit this year. I joined a research lab at my school, and I would highly recommend this as an extracurricular, especially if you are interested in pursuing research during medical school, but also later on as a physician. Just starting it in undergrad gives you a great base of knowledge and also can help you figure out if you do want to pursue it in the future. Let's see, cell biology and molecular genetics was a course that probably isn't offered everywhere, or maybe it's just called something different at different places, but I took that. I also took intro to psychology and intro to literature, which I wanted to point out, intro to literature was one that fulfilled English credits at several schools. So you have to keep that in mind to be taking types of classes that aren't necessarily science, but they do end up being requirements. Junior year, I took microbiology with lab. I took general physics, another treat, but took that the first and second general physics, both with labs. That, honestly, pay attention, because when it comes time for the MCAT, you're going to need physics again, And if you didn't learn it well in class during college, it's no fun. I took Intro to Sociology. That might have fulfilled prerequisites at certain places. And I took Research again this year. And my senior year, I took Physiology with lab. I took Human Anatomy with lab. Biostatistics, which in some schools is a requirement. And I also took Research for credit again. And I think these are the most relevant classes to mention. And like I said, you can take these in a bunch of different combinations and orders, and this isn't the right way to do it necessarily, but this is how I did it and how I got it all done in time. So if you need like some inspiration for your schedule, I just figured I'd share this. Moving on, we're going to start with the actual now applying process, which begins ultimately with taking the MCAT. So I started thinking about preparing for the MCAT and ordered the materials in January of 2020 when I was a senior, and that was during my winter break from school. So I got the Kaplan books and I started preparing in a relaxed way, which I talk about how I prepared for the MCAT in more details in my MCAT video, so you can check that one out. But that's when that all began for me, pretty early. And May of 2020, I started to begin a more focused MCAT prep because I had graduated from college in May, so I had more free time. We were also in quarantine for COVID during this time, so I had actually a lot of free time to dedicate to studying. Then in September, I took the MCAT and I began working my gap year job, which was in research, which I'm currently still working right now. And then in the winter of 2020 and then into 2021, I started working on my personal statement. And I really think this is important to begin thinking about as early as you can, because you can never write your personal statement too early unless something big happens later on that you weren't expecting and you can write about it. But I was so happy that I started writing my personal statement very early, because you can just think about different topics that you want to write about. You can maybe start writing about one topic, decide you want to trash the whole thing and start a new one, and you still have plenty of time to finish it. So highly recommend starting the personal statement early. Then in spring of 2021, I began prepping the work and activities section for my AMCAS application. This was also a very, it really helped me with timing and stress levels by doing this early, because at this point a lot of people start thinking about their personal statement, but I had already kind of worked out the kinks of that back in the winter. So by the spring, I had the personal statement all done. I decided to start doing the work and activities, and the AMCAS application had not opened yet, but I actually am planning to do a video outlining the application so you can know what it asks, and you can even start that ahead of time before it opens. That's what I did. I figured out what the application asked, and I just started writing on my own about how I would fill out those questions. All right. Now, May 3rd of 2021, the AMCAS application officially opened to let us begin editing it and filling in our responses. So that very day, I think I went, and maybe I honestly could have completed the whole thing, because I had worked on basically the work and activities and the personal statement are the two big chunks of that application. So aside from those, it's just demographic information. You fill in the schools you're applying to, and then it's your official GPA and, your courses. That takes a little bit of time, filling in your courses, but easy to do as long as you just have a transcript next to you. You can just chug along and enter those. And then moving on, May 27th of 2021 was the first day that we were allowed to submit the AMCAS application. And if you are following along with how I tend to do things, you might have guessed that I submitted it on this day. And I did this because I heard that it's a little bit finicky and hard to predict when your application will be processed, because once you submit it, there's a whole processing that has to happen, and then once it's actually processed, then it's ready to go and to be sent to schools. But that processing, depending on when you submit it, can take anywhere from a few days to a few months. And if it's taking a few months, your application is not being sent to schools. You just want it to be in as early as possible. So I submitted it the day that we were able to, and then it was processed by June 3rd of 2021. So it took, like 6 or 7 days to process. So pretty quick for me. So I would recommend getting it in really early if you can. Then June 25th of 2021, the completed AMCAS applications were released to the medical schools. So that's as long as your application, as long as you had submitted it, it had been processed successfully, then it was released to schools on June 25th. And then I actually began receiving secondary applications right on this day, I think. I received about 4 on June 25th. And as a side note, I tried to complete all the secondaries that I received within 2 weeks of the date that I received them. And this is a general rule that a lot of people follow, just because the longer you wait, technically I guess your chances will go down because it's rolling admissions at a lot of schools. So it's always just best, my default is just get things in as soon as you can. So that's what I did. And on July 23rd of 2021, I received the last of the secondary applications from all the schools I applied to. I think there might have been a couple schools that have to invite you to fill out the secondary, and that might have come later. I think like Vanderbilt comes to mind. That's one that they have to invite you. And so they look at your application first and then say, oh, you can now fill out a secondary and pay us. So that was that. Next, August 2nd of 2021, I received my first 2 interview invitations. Very exciting day. And after that date, I received 5 more invitations between August and November-ish. But you can technically still keep receiving invitations until January, and I think even sometimes February. So if you don't get them in August, September, I think that's the majority. People get them like September, October, November. So don't get stressed out about that. It's a waiting game, everything. So it's not really technically worth stressing yourself out. Whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. I know it's easier said than done, but. And then after my interviews that I did throughout that time, around, I think between August and December, I heard back on December 9th of 2021 that I got my first medical school acceptance. It was another very exciting day. And December, I think, is a little bit on the earlier side to hear back, because there are some schools that say they don't send any acceptances until January or even February. So if you don't hear back again by December, I wouldn't freak out. Also, moving on in early March, I think that's when the last of interviews can usually happen. It's like late February, early March. And then by April 30th, that's the last day that you can hear back from medical schools as being either accepted, rejected, or waitlisted at the school. And then from July to like September-ish of 2022 for me, that's when orientation and classes will begin for the medical schools. So if you are waitlisted at a school, you would know by April 30th that you're waitlisted, but then you technically could hear back from that school up until like the first day of class or the first day of orientation. So that's the tricky part, is if you're waiting on schools that you got waitlisted at, you're pretty much at the mercy of that school for those summer months, and you just have to wait and see. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a downer that it's that long of a wait sometimes, but if you get in the end, I guess it's all worth it. So that was my entire medical school application timeline, starting in undergrad and going all the way to being accepted to medical school, and when I'll begin orientation and classes in the fall. So I hope this video was helpful to really just put it all together and give you an overview of what you can expect if you are pre-med or if you're thinking of applying to medical school. This was my experience, and like I said, it can vary a little bit depending on the person and depending on how early you submit things. And my biggest advice from this video would be submit things very early, because your future self will thank your past self if you just are on top of things and get it done. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.